I designed this keep for use in my Dungeons & Dragons campaign, and now I'm going to use it as inspiration to create some playable terrain for my party. So this is going to be a 4-part series where I build the entire keep as playable interior. So for today's episode, we're going to focus on the hillside that the keep is set on, as well as the rough layout for the keep itself. And to do that, we're going to use these pieces of foam board. I got them at Lowe's, as well as a few oddly sized lids from a couple of things just to help make the towers. So let's go ahead and start with our layout. So using the original battle mat that I designed as kind of a guide, I'm going to put a couple of towers. These are going to be slightly different sized, and I want them to roughly line up with a couple of things. I want a fairly large playable interior just to kind of help with some more scenarios and uses in the future. And as I'm going through this, I'm just kind of roughly laying out where some of the balconies are going to go and most of the walls, as well as this small little library that kind of sticks out the front of the building, as well as a couple of interior walls to create a storeroom. Add in a few doors and a couple of windows, and we are looking pretty good. Alright, so now we're going to mark out the rough cliff face. Now, this is a very rough guide, and I'm probably going to end up changing this as I cut things away. And then a couple of lines for where the courtyard wall is going to go. Alright, so now let's go ahead and start shaping our landscape. So I started things off with a rough cut using a hot foam cutter. This is just going to be used to give a very loose formation around the keep. I'm just using it to take out the larger chunks of foam just to make the whole piece a little bit easier to handle. And once that's done, I'm going to hold the foam cutter at an angle and do kind of a 45 to 50 degree angled cuts just to kind of add a little bit of a bevel. This will make texturing a little bit easier as we progress through the steps. And off camera, I did the same thing with a couple more pieces of foam, slightly larger on each layer further down, just to kind of create some elevation and give a little bit more of an impression of height for the overall build. And this will also help as we add some interior things, like a basement or maybe even some catacombs underneath the courtyard. So now I'm going to mark out a cellar. Now, I don't really have a set defined area that this is going to take up, so I'm just doing a couple of very rough measurements, and I know roughly where I want this to be and kind of a general idea of how large it needs to be, but these are very rough measurements, and the idea is to kind of make it a little bit adaptable so that I can potentially go back and add more things over time. Then using a shop knife, I cut out the cellar framework. Now, I definitely recommend using a sharp knife for this. If it's dull, it's going to catch the edges and leave some very ugly cuts, which make it a lot harder to work with. Other than that, I'm just taking as many passes as I need to slowly and carefully get down to the bottom and cut all the way through. Then, using it as a guide off camera, I cut the same section out of the lower areas, and then using a little bit of silicone caulking, I fix all of the pieces together to create the full hillside. And then to ensure everything stays in place, I use a few toothpicks to kind of lock everything into position. Alright, so now to create the rocky texture for the hillside, I use the edge of a stiff metal ruler, and I'm just kind of dragging it along and using it to fray the edges and forcibly tear chunks off. And as you can see, you brush away all of the loose pieces, and you have a really nice rocky texture that takes very little time, but it is very messy. Alright, so now let's go ahead and make our cellar. Using some dollar store foam board, I draw out a fairly simple pattern for some bricks that are going to be the lining for the walls. Now these are pretty simple to put together. I'm using a ballpoint pen to kind of etch in the rough shape of the bricks. These are 10 millimeters tall by 15 millimeters wide. And the ballpoint pen makes it pretty easy to do. This way you don't have to use a knife or anything to score the foam. Then using the tip of the pen, I add a little bit of extra detail by rounding out the bricks, and I can also add some variation by misshaping some of them to kind of make them stand out a little bit more and add some character. Then using some aluminum foil, I add some texture by rolling it across the entire brick panel. This gives a pretty nice and realistic rock texture. Then I did a fairly heavy coating of some Artist Loft Gray to give the base coloration for the brickwork. I wanted them to appear like stone-hewn bricks, so I went with gray as the base. And then did a kind of medium dry brush of neutral gray. This will pick out all of the raised areas that were created by the aluminum foil texture. And then using a little bit of hot glue, I attach the panels, which I cut to fit the various shapes of the walls. Now if you do this, remember to make sure that all of the bricks line up so that you don't have them kind of misaligned. And then I use some barbecue skewers, which were perfect for disguising the top edge of the foam, and it really helps blend everything together. I created an extra wall with a door frame to create a room division for the cellar and also create a little bit of extra support for the floor that's going to go on top of it in another video. Alright, so now let's seal everything and get to painting. So I'm really only focused on the rocky edges of the build right now, so we're going to focus on those. I'm doing a mix of Mod Podge and black paint. This will give a base coating for everything, and once the Mod Podge dries, everything will be nice and firm. Then using Artist Loft Gray, I'm going to stipple that on over the entirety of the cliff face. This will create some nice shadowed areas, and we won't lose all of the black coloration for the deeper recesses. So we'll still have a few of those shadowed areas, and this will give a nice baseline for all of our stone texture. Now I'm going to use some burnt umber, and this is going to just kind of go on in little patches here or there. I want to stipple this on and just kind of create a few patches, but still leave a lot of that gray showing through. The goal here isn't to cover anything up, just kind of patch things on. And then in some of the remaining open areas, I use some raw umber to create a little bit more of a darker tone in a few areas. And then using some raw sienna, I stipple this in between all of the patches that I've put on, just to kind of create a little bit of some striping, which you see most of the time in natural rock formations. And once all that's done, I do a medium to heavy dry brush of some neutral gray. This gives the whole thing a very nice rocky appearance. Alright, and just like that, part 1 is finished. Alright, so I'm pretty happy with the results so far. This has been a pretty quick thing to do. I did this whole section in one day. I really like how the rocky cliff face turned out. It looks really nice, and I can definitely see a whole lot of the various colors that were put into it underneath the dry brush. The cellar looks amazing, and I cannot wait to start putting together the next section. Next, we are going to put together the courtyard as well as the ground floor for the keep itself. So thank you everyone for watching. Please hit that like button, subscribe for future content, comment in the comments section, and we will see everyone next episode.